Funny, isn't it? A man can work every day of his life, keep his head down, follow the rules, do what's expected, and still end up worrying about money at 65. He did everything right, and yet somehow, nothing feels right. You see it everywhere. Good people, hardworking people, still broke, still stressed, still waiting for things to change. But let me tell you something I've learned after many quiet years watching the world. It's not the job that keeps a man poor. It's not even the paycheck. It's the way he thinks. He doesn't know it, but he's been thinking like a poor man his whole life. Even when he had money in his hands, his mind was empty. Or worse, full of fear. Now, don't take that as an insult. This isn't about pride. This is about patterns. And poor thinking is a pattern, a quiet one, a patient one. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It hides behind noble-sounding ideas. It's not about the money. I just want enough to be comfortable. I'm not greedy. It's safer to stay where I am. You've heard them. You may have even said them. And each time, it felt reasonable. Humble, even. But you didn't notice what those thoughts were doing. They were building your life, one cautious brick at a time. A small, safe life. A boxed-in life. A life with no room to grow. And when the storms came, as they always do, there was nothing to fall back on. No cushion, no freedom, just more work. And more fear. You thought the problem was out there. The government, the boss, the cost of living. But the real problem was inside. You were taught to think small, to avoid risk, to fear loss, to survive, not expand. That's poor thinking. And it has nothing to do with your bank balance. I've met rich men who think like they're broke, and poor men who think like kings. It's not about what you have. It's about what you believe is possible, and most people don't believe in much. They don't believe they can walk away from a bad job. They don't believe they can learn new things. They don't believe they can build something of their own. So they stay where they are, trapped by invisible thoughts, bound by old advice, shaped by fear passed down through generations. And here's the most dangerous part. They don't even know they're trapped, because when you've lived in the same box your whole life, you stop seeing the walls. You just call it reality. But it's not reality. It's just a program you've been running silently, automatically, since you were a child. And unless you pause, unless you really look at it, it'll keep running you all the way to the end. I've seen it. I've sat across from men in their 70s, their hands rough from decades of labor, their eyes tired from worry, and do you know what they say? I wish I'd thought bigger. I wish I'd believed I could do more. I didn't know I was allowed. Allowed. That word breaks my heart, because somewhere along the way, they stopped asking for more, stopped imagining, stopped trying, not because they weren't capable, but because they were quietly convinced that it wasn't for them. And who convinced them? Sometimes a father, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a friend who meant well, but thought small, sometimes just life itself, with all its disappointments. But the result was the same, a man who lives like he's poor, not because he has to, but because he was trained to. That's the part no one talks about. That poverty isn't just passed through wallets. It's passed through words, through attitudes, through silence. You learn not to ask, not to dream, not to stand out. You learn to fit in, to endure, to wait. And so you wait for the raise, for the opportunity, for the breakthrough, but nothing. comes because nothing changes until you do. And that change, it doesn't start with more money. It starts with more awareness. You have to see the thinking that's been shaping you. You have to hear the voice in your head that says, "You're not smart enough. You're not special. People like you don't get rich." That voice doesn't belong to you. It was given to you. And you've been listening to it for far too long. The world outside won't change until the world inside does. So here's my question for you, and I ask it gently. Are you still thinking like a poor person, even when you don't have to? You weren't born poor in the mind. No one is. You came into this world reaching, curious, bold, unafraid to try. But somewhere along the way, that changed. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. It happens quietly, over years, not minutes. A word here, a warning there. Don't get your hopes up. That's not realistic. We can't afford that. Each sentence, spoken without malice, builds a frame around your thinking. And you learn to aim lower. You learn not to ask. You learn to say, "That's just how it is," and you don't even question it. Because it sounds normal. Because everyone around you thinks the same. That's the first trap of poor thinking. It feels safe. Because it's familiar, but familiar doesn't mean right. And comfort is not the same as freedom. You see, what most people don't realize is this: poverty of the mind is inherited. Not through money, but through repetition. You inherit your parents' fears, their stories, their limits, their coping mechanisms. You watch them stretch $1, say no to their own dreams, choose the practical over the possible, again and again, and you think, that must be the right way, not because it feels expansive, but because it's the only way you've ever seen. And so you become a careful person. Not a creative one, you become a realist. Not a builder. You become good at surviving, but terrible at thriving. And then life starts to harden. The habits settle in, the calendar fills, the choices shrink, and before you know it, you're walking the same tightrope they walked, balancing fear and responsibility. Trying not to fall. No one tells you there's another path. That the real work isn't just earning more, it's thinking differently. Let me give you a picture. Maybe it'll help. Imagine a man is given a small plot of land. The soil is poor. Rocks everywhere. He was told, "This is all you get. Make do." So he plants potatoes, just enough to feed his family. Every season, he grows the same crop. Same size, same result. One day, a stranger walks by and says, "Why don't you clear the rocks? Why not try planting something new?" And the man shakes his head. "Nah, my father planted potatoes. His father did too. This is poor land. I'm just doing the best I can." But the truth is, he never tested the land. He never cleared it. He never asked what it could become. He just assumed it was limited, because everyone before him said. So that's how most people live. Inside a story they didn't write, but one they keep repeating. And that story is costing them their future. It sounds like this: "I don't have a choice. I can't afford to fail. I'm not lucky like them." But behind every one of those phrases is a belief. And behind every belief is a decision. Even now, you're deciding what kind of life you're allowed to live. Whether you realize it or not, that's the second trap of poor thinking. It feels like truth, but it's just habit, and habits can be broken. But only if you stop protecting them. Only if you're willing to challenge the story. Here's a question you might not have asked yourself. What if everything you were taught about money was taught by someone who was afraid of it? Afraid of losing it. Afraid of never having enough. Afraid of wanting too much. If that's the case, and for many it is, then you've been trained to avoid wealth. Not chase it. You've been trained to cope with lack, not create abundance. And every time you think of something bigger, something freer, your mind pulls back. Too risky, too hard, too late. But let me ask you, what if those aren't facts? What if they're just echoes? Echoes from people who never tested their own soil. People who never asked what else was possible. See, it's not that you're not capable. It's that you've been trained to believe you're not. And belief is powerful. It can move mountains. Or it can build walls. Most people use it to build walls, invisible ones, around their jobs, around their creativity, around their potential. And then they wonder why nothing changes. But how could it? You can't live beyond the borders of your own thinking. That's the truth I came to understand later in life. It wasn't the world keeping me small. It was the way I saw the world. And until that changed, my circumstances never would. Now, I'll stop here. Not because we've finished, but because maybe this is the moment where something softens in you. Not a revolution. Just a crack, a small one, but enough to let something new in. So I'll ask you gently again, whose beliefs have you been living by? And are they still serving you? You ever notice how often people say, I just want enough? Not more, not less, just enough to get by. Just enough to not worry. Just enough to pay the bills, feed the kids, rest a little. It sounds reasonable. It sounds humble. But I'll tell you what it really is. It's a cage, a quiet one. One that feels kind, but keeps you stuck. Because once enough becomes your ceiling, you stop reaching, you stop building, you stop growing. You settle, and maybe you don't see it as settling. Maybe you call it being content or realistic. But contentment is not the same as contraction. Let me say that again. Contentment is not the same as contraction. There's nothing wrong with being grateful for what you have. That's a beautiful thing, a necessary thing. But when you use it as a reason not to stretch, you've confused peace with fear. I've met folks who say, I don't need a big house. I don't need fancy things. And that may be true. But that's not the question. The real question is, are you hiding behind that belief because you're afraid of what it would take to become more? See, poor thinking isn't always loud. It's not always desperate or dramatic. Sometimes it wears a calm face. Sometimes it calls itself being wise. But look closer. It avoids challenge. It resists expansion. It mistrusts prosperity. Why? Because it's been trained to survive on scraps. And when you've lived on scraps long enough, you forget there was ever a feast. So when abundance knocks, you hesitate. You question it. You sabotage it. You push it away, not because you don't want it, but because you don't feel safe with it. That's poor thinking, not just believing. You can't have more, but believing you shouldn't. Somewhere deep in your wiring, you may carry the idea that having more is wrong, that it makes you selfish, or greedy, or less spiritual, or less loved. You may not say it out loud, but it shows up in your choices. You undercharge. You don't speak up. You delay the decision. You walk away from the door that's open and go back to the one that's familiar. And life lets you, because life doesn't force expansion on anyone. It just offers it, quietly, over and over again, until one day, the offer stops coming. Not out of punishment, but out of your own pattern. You trained life to stop expecting more from you. So it stopped bringing it. It's not because the world is unfair. It's because you signaled to the world, I'm not available for more. I'm not willing to hold it. Now that may sound heavy, but it's not a condemnation. It's a revelation, because if you trained your life to stay small, you can train it to grow, but not by chasing more. By becoming someone who can carry more with peace, with clarity, with strength. That's where the shift begins. Not in your wallet, not in your career. In your capacity. The way you think, the way you receive, the way you allow yourself to imagine. See, a poor person doesn't just lack money. They lack permission. Permission to want more. Permission to learn more. Permission to build a different future. Not from the world, from themselves. And if you've never granted yourself that permission, you'll keep living in a small version of your life, a version that looks fine to others, one that you can justify, one that doesn't raise eyebrows, but deep down, you'll feel the tightness. Like a coat you've outgrown, still warm, still wearable, but no longer right. You'll wake up one day and realize you made your life smaller than it had to be, just to feel safe. And safety is not the same as freedom. So let me ask you this, softly but clearly. Have you confused enough with all you're allowed to have? Because if you have, that's the thought that's keeping you poor. Let me tell you something most folks never realize until it's far too late. The hardest work you'll ever do is not your job. It's not the hours you put in. It's not the grind. The hardest work is the work on your mind, and most people never do it. They'll spend 40 years building a career, but not 4 hours examining their beliefs. They'll climb ladders, learn systems, master routines, but never once ask themselves why they're still afraid of having more. It's strange, isn't it? We fix broken cars. We patch leaky roofs. We update our phones, but we leave our minds untouched, still running on old programming, like a dusty machine we never clean. That's poor thinking. It keeps you busy with the visible, while the invisible keeps you bound. You think the problem is the bills, the boss, the economy, but I've seen men win the lottery and lose it all. I've seen people double their income and stay broke, because the issue was never about what they had. It was about what they could hold, and a poor mindset cannot hold wealth. It leaks. It doubts. It resists. It panics. It finds a way to return to what feels familiar, even if what's familiar is lack. Because to the untrained mind, familiar is safer than freedom. So what happens? You avoid the real work, the deep, quiet work. You keep looking for new tactics, new jobs, new distractions. They don't fix the root. They just dress it up. You can change the wallpaper, but if the foundation is cracked, the house will still fall. And here's what most people won't tell you. That foundation, your mindset, wasn't chosen. It was absorbed. You soaked it in through years of repetition, not by thinking, but by watching. You watched people you loved worry about money. You watched them shrink their dreams. You watched them accept less, and you learned, not because you wanted to, but because you had no other map. And now, here you are, older, wiser, a little more tired, but still holding the same map, still walking the same path, still telling yourself, this is just how it is. But what if it isn't? What if your life has been shaped not by truth, but by repetition? What if your normal is just practiced poverty? What if the ceiling you keep hitting was installed by someone who didn't know how to raise it? That's what I mean when I say the work isn't out there. It's in here. It's in the stories you keep telling yourself. It's too late. I'm not smart enough. I've always been this way. I'm just not good with money. You repeat those lines like they're scripture, like they can't be rewritten. But let me ask you, who wrote them? And why do you still believe them? Because I'll tell you the truth, softly but clearly. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who chooses which thoughts to keep. And if you can choose your thoughts, you can choose your future, but only if you're willing to sit down quietly and start pulling the old weeds. That's the real labor, the one no one applauds, the one with no paycheck, no deadline, no boss. Just you, alone, facing the mirror, asking, what do I really believe about money? About myself? About what's possible? That's where it begins. Not with a course, not with a raise, not with a breakthrough, but with a reckoning. A quiet one. You sit across from yourself, like we're sitting now, and you ask, am I thinking like someone who's building a future, or someone who's surviving the past? You ever notice how some people run from discomfort? Like it's a fire? They'll stay in a job they hate, a routine that drains them, a life that slowly tightens around the chest just to avoid the uncertainty of something new. And they'll tell you it's because they're being responsible, or practical, or loyal. But often, it's fear of failing, fear of being judged, fear of stepping outside the lines they were taught to walk. So they stay where it's safe, or where it seems safe. But I'll tell you something I've learned the hard way. The place that feels safe is often the most dangerous, because it keeps you asleep. It keeps you repeating. It keeps you away from the kind of discomfort that actually sets you free. Let me explain. There are two kinds of discomfort in this life. One comes from staying small. The other comes from growing. One eats at you slowly, from the inside. A dull ache you learn to live with. The other feels like fire in your chest, sharp, honest, alive. Most people choose the first. They think they're avoiding pain, but they're only delaying it, because that dull ache, it turns into regret. And regret is heavy, heavier than fear, heavier than failure. But the second kind of discomfort, the fire, that's the one that forges you. It wakes you up. It stretches your soul. And yes, it burns. But it also builds. It's the discomfort of trying something new. The discomfort of learning, of saying, I don't know, but I'm willing to find out. That's not poor thinking. That's wealth thinking. Because wealth, real wealth, isn't just money. It's the capacity to face discomfort with courage. Most broke people avoid pain. They run from conflict. They hide from risk. They only do what's familiar, even if it doesn't serve them. But rich minds, they lean in. They face the discomfort of growth, of uncertainty, of rejection. They know it's the price of a larger life. You might say, well, that's easy for them. They had resources. They had support. Maybe so. But do you know what they also had? Tolerance for discomfort. They were willing to feel awkward, to fail publicly, to look foolish. They were willing to be new at something before they were good at it. And that's what most people can't bear. They want to skip the fire. They want ease now, but ease is earned. And often, it's earned through discomfort. Let me give you an image. Picture a young tree, bent by strong wind. If it survives, it grows deeper roots, stronger bark, a spine that can hold the weight of storms. But if you shield it from all wind, it stays fragile, shallow, unable to hold its own. That's what happens to us when we avoid the winds of discomfort. We stay bendable, breakable. You want to think like someone who's not poor? Don't chase ease. Chase resilience. Chase the kind of strength that comes from walking into discomfort and coming out wiser. That means having hard conversations, setting boundaries, learning skills you don't yet have, taking steps that make your hands shake. Because the truth is, you can't grow and stay comfortable. Not at the same time. Poor thinking says, I'll change when it's easy. I'll wait for the right time. I don't want to rock the boat. But growth says, now is messy, but now is enough. I may not know how, but I'll try anyway. I can't afford to wait for comfort. My future is calling. That's the shift. Not in your income, not in your job. In how you relate to discomfort. Because discomfort isn't the enemy. It's the signal that you're entering new ground, that your walls are cracking, that your old thoughts are dying, and in that space, between what's safe and what's next, you begin to become someone else, someone freer, someone stronger, someone wealthier, in ways no paycheck can measure. So I'll leave you with this question. What discomfort are you avoiding that's quietly keeping your life small? You ever feel like you're always starting from scratch? Like no matter how far you get, you find yourself right back at the beginning again. Maybe it's a little more money. Then an emergency wipes it out. Maybe it's a new opportunity. But somehow it slips through your hands. Maybe things finally start to feel stable. And then the rug gets pulled. It happens so often, some people start calling it bad luck. But I've come to believe it's something deeper. It's not fate. It's not a curse. It's a pattern, a poverty pattern. And it starts with this. When your identity is rooted in survival, you'll keep finding ways to survive, even when you don't need to anymore. It sounds strange, I know. But the mind doesn't always serve your growth. It serves your familiarity. And if struggle is what you know, then struggle becomes what you seek. Not consciously, no one asks for pain. But quietly, subconsciously, automatically, you save a little, then you spend to treat yourself. You get a raise, then you take on new bills. You start building. Then you get overwhelmed and sabotage the whole thing. Why? Because some part of you doesn't yet believe you're meant to have more. Some part of you thinks, if I let go of the fight, who am I? That's what poverty does to a person. It gives them a role, a rhythm, a way of life. And after enough time, you forget there was ever another script to play. You become someone who's always bouncing back, always recovering, always rebuilding. And eventually, you wear it like a badge. I'm a survivor, you say. And you are, but you were never meant to stay in survival. You were meant to graduate from it. To move from surviving to designing, from recovering to receiving, from starting over to sustaining. But that takes a different mind, one that's not addicted to chaos, one that doesn't panic when things get calm, one that can hold abundance without dropping it. Let me tell you a story. I once knew a man, smart, resourceful, quick with his hands. Every time life knocked him down, he got back up, found a new hustle, started again, made things work. But he never held on to anything. Money came, then vanished. Opportunities came, then passed. Relationships, homes, ideas, all temporary. One day I asked him, "What's going on really?" And he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I don't know how to live without a fight." That broke something in me, because I saw myself in him. And I saw so many others. People who don't know how to rest. People who mistrust peace. People who only feel alive when there's pressure, because somewhere along the line, struggle became their identity. And here's the painful truth. If struggle is who you think you are, then ease will feel like a threat. So you'll push it away. You'll overwork. You'll overspend. You'll complicate what could be simple, not because you're broken, but because your mind has only been trained to survive. That's poor thinking. Not just the belief that you'll always struggle, but the belief that you should, that ease is unearned, that rest is laziness, that success must be punished. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can unlearn it. You can build something stable. You can hold peace without dropping it. But first, you have to believe something new, that you are allowed to have more. And you don't have to bleed for it. You can earn with joy. You can receive with gratitude. You can live without drama. But to do that, you have to stop identifying with the fight. Let go of the badge. Let go of the story. Let go of the need to start from zero. Because you were not made to circle the same mountain forever. You were made to rise. So ask yourself gently, do I keep starting over? Because some part of me is afraid to keep going? Listen closely to how people talk about money, and you'll start to hear what they believe about it. Not what they say they believe, but what's buried underneath. I can't afford that. Must be nice. Money doesn't grow on trees. People like us don't live like that. Simple phrases, harmless on the surface, but loaded with poverty underneath. Because words aren't just noise. They're instructions, signals, seeds. And if you keep planting the same seeds, you're going to keep growing the same crop. You see, poor thinking has a language. It's a language of limits, of fear, of resignation. It always assumes there's not enough. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough opportunity, not enough you. And the more you speak it, the more real it becomes. You start budgeting with a panic in your chest. You start giving with guilt. You start dreaming smaller, or not at all, because your words create your world. Not in some magical sense, but in a very human, very powerful way. What you repeat, you begin to believe. What you believe, you begin to expect. And what you expect, you begin to allow. That's the cycle. So when a man tells himself, people like me don't get ahead, he's not just describing his reality, he's reinforcing it. Every time he says it, his imagination shrinks. His actions get safer. His life closes in, and the world responds in kind, not because it's cruel, but because he's already closed the door from the inside. That's how deep poor thinking runs. It doesn't just live in your decisions. It lives in your dialogue, the things you say when you're tired, when you're stressed, when no one's around to hear. The sigh when you see a price tag, the little joke when someone drives a nice car, the story you tell yourself when others succeed. And it doesn't stop with money. Scarcity affects how you talk about yourself. I'm not smart enough. I'm just a simple person. I could never pull that off. These are not facts, they're rehearsed beliefs. And every time you say them, you strengthen the wall around your life. A wall that doesn't just keep money out. It keeps growth out, keeps connection out, keeps possibility out. You build a fortress of familiar phrases, and then wonder why you feel stuck inside. But here's the quiet truth. Your language reveals your loyalties. Are you loyal to your past or to your potential? Because you can't serve both. You can't keep speaking from a place of lack and expect to live from a place of abundance. Something has to shift. And that shift begins with awareness, listening to yourself, catching the little phrases that slide out unchecked, the ones that seem harmless, but aren't, because the words you whisper to yourself are the roots of your identity. And identity is what decides what you reach for and what you let pass you by. You want to think like someone who's not poor? Start with the way you speak. Not to impress others, but to free yourself. Speak with ownership. Not "I can't afford that, but that's not a priority right now." Not "I'm always broke, but I'm learning how to grow." That may sound small, it may sound silly, but don't underestimate it. A ship shifts course with just a degree of movement. Over time, that shift changes everything. Same with you. Tiny changes in language can lead to giant changes in life, but only if you're willing to stop repeating the story of limitation. If you're ready to retire the phrases that kept you safe, but never strong. So I'll ask you now, gently, as always, what have your words been building around you? A future or a fence? Let me tell you something most folks don't realize. Poverty isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, polite, respectable. It hides in small dreams, in safe choices, in the kind of life that doesn't ruffle any feathers. You work. You pay your bills. You stay out of trouble. You live within your means, and people might even praise you for it. But deep down, something aches, because you know there's more. More you could give, more you could become, more you were meant for, but you don't go after it. You don't dare. Why? Because something in you has been taught, maybe since you were a child, that it's dangerous to want too much, that ambition is arrogance, that dreaming is for the lucky, that life will punish you for stepping out of line. So you shrink. You tuck yourself in. You keep your head down, and you call it being realistic. But it's not realism. It's fear dressed up in sensible clothes. And here's the problem. When you live small long enough, you start to think small is all you're allowed. You forget what it feels like to be bold. You forget what it feels like to risk. You forget what it feels like to be alive. That's the tragedy. You survive, but you don't expand. You keep your job, but you lose your joy. You avoid failure, but you miss the fire. And slowly, poverty creeps in, not always in your bank account, but in your decisions, in your courage, in your very presence. You don't speak up. You don't try new things. You don't invest in yourself. You settle. And then you rationalize the settling. You say, well, I'm just not like those people. Or, I'm not meant for anything big. But those are lies. Not malicious lies, just inherited ones, passed down by people who were also scared. People who also thought small was safe. But here's what life taught me. Playing small is not safe. It's expensive. It costs you your future. It costs you your voice. It costs you the chance to know who you really are. And it makes you resentful. You start blaming the world. You start envying those who didn't play by the same rules. You start carrying a quiet bitterness. Because deep down, you know, you chose the smaller life. And now it's choosing you back. You see, poverty thinking isn't always loud desperation. Sometimes it's just a quiet refusal to grow. A life where you stop reaching, stop risking, stop asking for more. But hear me now, you weren't meant to live like that. You were meant to stretch, to stumble and rise, to walk into rooms that scare you, to try and fail and try again, until your life reflects who you really are. That's wealth. Not money, not possessions, but the freedom to become And that freedom doesn't come to those who play it safe, that it comes to those who dare to break the cycle, who look around at their quiet, tidy life and say, "This isn't me. I was made for more." And not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a steady, grounded way, a way that honors what you've been through, but refuses to let that be the ceiling dot. So if you've been shrinking yourself, if you've been making your life smaller so others don't feel uncomfortable, if you've been calling fear wisdom and calling dreams unrealistic, stop. Not because you're wrong, but because you're more than that. You are not the smallness you've been living. You're the potential you've been burying. And no matter how long you've been poor in your thinking, one decision can begin the undoing. One moment of truth, one act of courage, one step toward the bigness you've been avoiding. So ask yourself, if I wasn't afraid to grow, what kind of life would I be building right now? And then, go build it. Let's sit with something quiet today, not a fact, not a theory, just a simple truth that many miss. You don't get the life you want. You get the life you believe you deserve. That's a hard thing to swallow, because on the surface, most people say they want more, a better job, more money, peace, freedom, joy. But deep down, if you ask them to name the life they truly believe they're worthy of, you'll hear a different story. You'll hear hesitation. You'll hear old voices. You'll hear shame that has grown roots. I've made too many mistakes. I'm not smart enough. I didn't grow up with the right support. It's too late for me now. And so they stop themselves. Before life ever does, they live beneath their potential, not because anyone's holding them down, but because something inside them keeps saying, "This is all you're allowed." That's poverty. Not the poverty of money, but the poverty of belief. A kind of quiet prison where the door is wide open, but no one dares to walk out. You tell yourself you're being responsible, that you're just trying to get by, that dreaming is for people who don't have real problems. But the truth is, you've mistaken your limits for laws. You've lived with certain thoughts for so long, you stopped questioning them. You started treating them as facts, unchangeable, permanent, true. But belief is not truth. It's just repetition. It's just the thought you've agreed with the longest. Maybe someone once told you that you wouldn't amount to much, and you believed them. Maybe life knocked you down early, and you learned to expect the floor. Maybe the people around you never aimed higher, so you thought you were being loyal by staying small. Whatever the story was, it's time to ask, is it still true? Or have I just stopped updating it? Because here's what most people never get taught. Your beliefs build your behavior builds your rhythm, and your rhythm builds your results. Every time you avoid asking for more, every time you settle instead of stretch, every time you say, "People like me can't do that," you're laying another brick in the house of your own limitations. Not because it's comfortable, but because it's familiar. But let me ask you something. If the beliefs you're holding today are keeping you poor in spirit, poor in vision, poor in action, then what are they really doing for you? Are they protecting you, or are they preventing you? And what if you didn't need permission to believe something new? What if you didn't have to wait until your circumstances changed? Until your boss gave you a raise, or the economy improved, or someone saw your potential? What if all it took was for you to decide? To say, "I may have been raised to think poor. I may have lived that way for years. But that is not who I am. And it is not who I choose to be anymore." That kind of belief, It's a seed. It doesn't grow overnight, but if you water it daily, if you speak to it kindly, if you let it take root, eventually it changes the shape of your life. You stop waiting, you start creating. You stop fearing lack. You start practicing value. And people will notice. They'll say, "You've changed." And you'll smile, because they're right. You didn't just change your habits. You changed your mind. You changed what you believed was possible. And that changed what became possible. So if you're still thinking like a poor person, if you're still carrying beliefs that keep you small, afraid, obedient, let this be your quiet awakening. Not a dramatic moment, not a speech, just a whisper. I don't have to think this way anymore. That's how wealth begins, not with dollars, but with a decision, and it's yours to make. There's something I want you to remember now, and not just with your mind, but with your whole being. You were not born thinking like a poor person. That came later. It was taught to you, shown to you, whispered in your ear when life got heavy, and your shoulders were still small. You were trained to wait, to obey, to shrink yourself in the face of money, power, and possibility. You were handed a script and told, "This is who you are." And you believed it, because you had no reason not to. But now you know too much. Now you've seen the patterns, heard the voice that keeps you tame, felt the ache of playing too small for too long. And if you've made it this far, you're ready for the reversal, not a loud rebellion, a quiet returning, a slow, deep remembering of who you were before the world convinced you otherwise. Let me ask you something you may have never been asked. What would life look like if you stopped thinking like a poor person completely? Not just financially. I mean poor in energy, poor in belief, poor in courage. What would happen if you stopped making decisions out of fear, stopped assuming you'd be left behind, stopped letting your past write your paycheck, and instead started honoring your time like it mattered, started practicing wealth even before the money came, started looking in the mirror and seeing someone worthy, worthy of having, worthy of peace, worthy of enough? You see, it was never just about income. It was about identity. You became what you repeated. Now you must become what you remember. Remember that you are not your limitations. You are not your job title. You are not your parents' fears or your society's expectations. You are a builder of thought, of rhythm, of life. And every day, whether you see it or not, you are building something. So stop building a life you resent. Stop pouring your days into beliefs that keep you broke in mind and spirit. Start small. Start slow. But start with truth. And here's the truth. Are not poor. You are powerful, but you've been thinking like someone who isn't, and it's cost you more than money. It's cost you time. It's cost you self-respect. It's cost you the chance to rise. So now, not tomorrow, not someday, you decide. Decide to think like someone who is becoming, who is capable, who is ready. No fanfare, no big show. Just the quiet work of real transformation. A better life begins in silence. Not with noise, but with a whisper you finally believe. This is not who I am anymore. That's the moment the chains fall. Not all at once, but link by link. And one morning, not far from now, you'll wake up, look around, and feel it. Not riches, not applause. But peace. And you'll know you're no longer poor, because you've stopped thinking like someone who was. Asterisk. If this helped you, pass it to someone who's still in the dark. You might be the spark they never had.